Most of you know Joel Salatin. I'm not going to get into a big resume because I think most of you know what he's all about. I just want to read one chapter from his book. Folks, this ain't normal. Get this book. Trust me, if you haven't seen it yet, they're available next door. You're going to be doing a little bit of book signing, but really, I encourage everybody who can get a hand on this book, read it. It's amazing. But I think this sums it up right here. This is why for much of my life now, I've been trying to undo my westernized, damaged brain by tempering it with some Eastern holistic, community-based, we're all relatives, connected kind of thinking. A lot of those type of people are here today. A culture that views animals and plants as inanimate piles of protoplasmic structure to be manipulated, however cleverly hubris can imagine to manipulate it, will view its citizens the same way. Our respecting and honoring the bigness of the pig, therefore, creates the ethical and moral framework upon which we respect and honor the merriness of Mary and the Tomness of Tom. Ladies and gentlemen, experience the Salatinness of Joel Salatin.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here, and I'm in Minnesota. Yeah. It's great to see the wellness fair, to see what's catching on in this community, and I call this a local food tsunami. People say, where are we? Well, we're in a tsunami, and I feel like a Cinderella. I've been this ugly,
rabble-rouser?
Duckling.
Ugly. Yeah, well, you got to mix your bed. I mean, Cinderella was really just an ugly stepsister or whatever. She was a whatever chambermaid, all of her life. And suddenly you wake up and you're chic, and that's pretty amazing. So I wrote this book, Folks, This Ain't Normal, as a result of my frustrations of meeting so many under 40 young people. I won't put anybody under 40 as young, who just seemed like they had this notion that we were going to be the very first civilization in history that was going to be so clever and so technically advanced and so smart. They were going to be the first culture in history that's able to cut those moorings to our ecological umbilical and sail off in some Star Trek nirvana, eating breakfast pills and sitting in front of computer terminals and being able to extricate ourselves from such a mundane thing as visceral relationships with the processes of living. And so here we are in an extremely aberrant time in human history. And let me just describe a little bit of that aberration, and then I want to move then forward into explaining how I think that in the future we will be coming back to many of these glues, and we're already seeing that start to happen. Apart from the local food tsunami, the fact that people are actually starting to go to chiropractors. That people are starting to think about wellness and going to wellness fairs. I mean, did you ever see a wellness fair in the 1960s? I mean, by the 1960s, we were so thoroughly embedded and ingrained in the industrial paradigm, of disconnection. I mean, enamored of TV dinners and Velveeta cheese and right? And I mean, we even abandoned breastfeeding. I mean, as barbaric and Neanderthal. I mean, I've always thought, what a terrible, probably the worst resource waste in the history of a civilization to go 2 decades and not use any of those breasts. I mean, it's amazing. So here we are, and people are beginning to come back, and we're starting to see this local food, this wellness need as we've run the gamut of this aberrant culture, which is based on a couple of things. One is cheap grain. No history no civilizations in history has ever had cheap grain until very, very recent history. In fact, right now, Americans are eating twice as much wheat as we did just 50 years ago. And you wonder why people have celiacs and, gluten intolerance and all this stuff. I mean, just conceive of a civilization that doubles its consumption of one item in just 50 years. I mean, that's pretty dramatic, right? It's all those crackers and Cheerios and stuff. Okay, so what happened to make this possible? I want you to think about it. 200 years ago, if you wanted grain, 200 years ago plus, the rest of human history, if you wanted grain, if you wanted wheat, barley, rye, corn, if you wanted grain, you had to spend all day with a sharp stick walking behind an animal. A yak, a camel, an ox, a horse, a mule, okay, with a sharp stick, okay, to till the ground, all right? And at the end of the day, you might have something tilled up, maybe twice the size of this stage. Then you get to go out and you get to fling a little bit of, the grain out there, get sprouts. Then you get to hoe out the weeds with a crude hoe. And then you get to go in when it grows up and turns brown. You get to go over the side. You get to side this down with a side. You get to shock it up in sheaves, tie them in a bundle, and let them sit there for a couple, 3 weeks to dry down. Then you get to take that into a threshing floor, and you get to beat it with a flail or stomp on it or run an ox over it or run all the kindergartners over it or something to beat out the grain. Then you get to take a crude wooden fork and fling it up into the air in a breeze. The breeze then blows the chaff over here in a pile. At the end of the day, you got a little bit of grain in there. That's great. Crab that up a little bit, And now where are we going to store it till next year in a day before there's any sheet metal or wire mesh to keep it away from the rats and the mice? Well, the only thing we've got is clay pots. So we're going to put it in some clay pots here, okay? We're going to put a lid on it. And we're going to meter that out throughout the year for baking bread and things like that. And grain was expensive because tillage was laborious, okay? I mean, that's why even in the biblical book of Hosea, the minor prophet talks about a harlot being sold for just 9.5 ephahs of barley. It's about 2 bushels. It's not because harlots were cheap. It's because barley was expensive, okay? And has been throughout human history. And so grain could not be fed to herbivores. It was not even fed to omnivores. It was needed for human consumption. And so diets, human diets throughout history were founded on things that didn't require tillage. Well, what would that be possibly? Because tillage was so laborious. So what are we going to build a diet based on of things that don't require all this energy of tillage? They were built on herbivores or seafood. If you lived near an ocean or a lake, it revolved around water-based things, aquatic life. Why? Because that was the only nutrient-dense food that you could get without tillage. You just had to go out and catch it, as long as you could fashion a hook or a net of some sort. And on land, it was herbivore. That included dairy, because herbivore was the only thing that could convert non-tilled perennials into nutrient density. Everything else was a luxury around the edges. And then beyond that, everything was based on perennials. Perennial fruit, perennial bushes. I mean, if you get any early American, like Martha Jefferson's cookbook, Dolly Madison's cookbook, you'll find there a whole host of perennials from gooseberries, juneberries, quinces, plums, the variety of perennial fruits from shrubs and trees, the variety will make your head spin. I mean, we walk into a supermarket today, and you look at all those shelves of stuff, there's no variety there. There's 4-color printing and labels, but it's all basically reconfigurations of corn and soybeans. There's no real variety. But you go back a couple of hundred years, And there was huge variety. I mean, how many of you have eaten parsnips? You know, there were just huge varieties of different kinds of foods. And many of them were perennials, and the whole civilizations were pushed toward the perennial, and it was, now the grain was the holy grail because it was so expensive. And so we get this idea that the world revolves around grain. Well, the only reason it revolves around grain is because throughout human history, it was the holy grail of agriculture because it was so laborious and expensive to do. It was like diamonds. But the mainstay of dietary rules and menus revolved around perennials, herbivores, or seafood, because those were things that did not require tillage. Well, what happened then, as we got cheap energy and machines, suddenly what had been scarce and valuable for the first time in history became cheap. And that cheapness fundamentally altered the way we ate and the way we handled the landscape. Because you see, the power up until cheap energy and mechanization, the power to run a farm, the power to run a city, the power to run a food system was all animal power. I mean, except for grist mills and mills and things like that. But essentially it was draft power, animal power, which is all herbivorous, which required pasturage, grass. Now, we're brain damaged when it comes to grass. We are. I mean, when I say grass, first thing that comes to your mind is a lawn or a golf course. But when I say grass, I'm talking about Little House on the Prairie, Laura Ingalls Wilder. And when Ma and Pa wouldn't let the girls go past the threshold of the soddy lest they become lost. And we would read that and say, lost? My goodness, if I did that in my lawn, the beautification committee would come and cite me for, some sort of a lawn care negligence complaint, for not taking care of the lawn. But that's the kind of grass I'm talking about. I'm talking about the grass that in the 1700, when Governor Spotswood, the colonial governor of Virginia, dispatched his close friends, he dubbed them the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe, and sent them across the Blue Ridge into the Shenandoah Valley where we live today, Shenandoah Valley, to scope it out because the settlers were starting to go back there and he wanted to report on what's back there. They wrote back and said everywhere they rode in the valley they could take the grass and tie it in a knot above the horse's saddle. It was a vast silvopasture of widely spaced trees and tall grasses. I'm talking about the kind of grass, if you go today to the University of Nebraska, they maintain a 2-acre tall grass prairie field there at the university in Lincoln. And you walk out there among 12 foot, I'm almost 6 feet, so imagine twice as high as I am, 12 feet high, 3/4 of an inch at the base, the big stems, and thick as hair on a dog's back, and you walk out there, and it just swallows you up. And just to imagine sitting on the buckboard of a wagon, going out through that and seeing hundreds of miles of that waving solar energy converted into decomposable biomass out there ahead. And you realize that was the wealth of North America. And in fact,